Hey climbers, Brent here. Are you ready to write your best songs ever? Are you ready to take that next step in your songwriting journey? Well, I want to help you with that. Listening to the C.L.I.M.B podcast is a great way to get started on your songwriting journey and to learn the basics about the art, the craft, and the business of songwriting. But eventually, you're probably going to need the personal touch. You're probably going to need some one-on-one feedback, some advice, and some help reaching your songwriting goals. And that's what I want to help do for you. I want to help you write your best songs ever. And I want to help you learn the art, the craft, and the business of songwriting, of how to turn pro in your mind and in your behavior before you ever turn pro on paper. Before you ever have the awards to hang on the wall, I want to give you the mindsets and the skills to earn that stuff. And so we'll dive into your questions and I'll give you honest answers. And I can help repair your song if it's already written but has a couple bugs and has some opportunities to get better. Or we can help prepare your song if you have an idea, a notion, a title. We can do your own private song title challenge if you want. If you want to get ready for a co-write, if you have a meeting coming up and you want to get your stuff locked down where it's the best it can be, I'm happy to help you do that as well. You can see my calendar, get all the details, and actually book a session at songwritingpro.com/coaching. That is songwritingpro.com/coaching. Now, if you're still not sure if a coaching session with me is the right thing for you, let's listen to what this climber had to say about their session.
This review is for anyone who is on the fence about booking a session with Brent Baxter. I have done several one-on-one coaching sessions via Skype and also completed an online class that Brent hosted a few months ago. I have nothing but great things to say about both of these experiences. I am a physician and a hospital administrator. Music and songwriting are two of my favorite hobbies and have been for many years. But as a hobbyist and someone who spends a great deal of time at work and in my career, it can be difficult to concentrate on something completely unrelated, or for that matter to devote the tremendous time and energy that is required to see decent results. Brent is a true professional who can quickly orient himself to what you want and what you need and be that perfect lyric writing partner that you otherwise would not be able to find. I tried writing with other amateurs online in the past, but it never went anywhere. Having the insight and experience of a professional, someone who has dedicated his career to the development of his craft, really makes a difference. If you do your part after he does his, I guarantee you will be happy that you spent the money and the time, and you will be hooked.
All right, guys, welcome to another Song Title Challenge where the question is, songwriters, how would you write this one? We have the community, the climbers, they send in song titles to info@daredevilproduction.com. Production is singular. There is no S. info@daredevilproduction.com. They put Song Title Challenge in the subject line so we know what it's for and we put it in the right folder. And you can send in as many song titles as you want, as often as you want. We're going to pick one every 2 weeks, and Brent and I go through and mimic an exercise that happens on Music Row for the first 15 minutes of every write. Somebody comes up with a song title, everybody feels like, yeah, I could feel that. And then the next step is they don't just start writing lyrics, trying to figure out 4 or 5 different approaches conceptually to how they would write the lyrics. What are some twists we can throw in this? What are some storylines we could, storyboard up before we get into writing the details of it? And that's what makes for a really, really good song. And this exercise, by the way, will breathe new life into old titles that you may have forgotten about, that are dead to you right now in your hook book, that can come back because you spent a little bit of time doing this. It's a fun, creative exercise. It's not a co-write. Don't worry about that. Keep everything that we do. Keep nothing that we do. Mm-hmm. It's completely up to you, but it's just fun little creative muscle that we flex. Anything you want to add to that, brother?
No, it's infotainment, man. This is to inspire you to dig more deeply into your ideas and realize that the first idea that comes with the title or something may not be the best one. It might be, but it might not be.
That's right.
Keep going. Keep churning.
All right, so we're going to spring this live on the air with Brent, and then we're going to put him under the gun. So, sir, are you ready?
Not at all. Let's go.
All right, so the contributor is Randy England.
Randy England.
The songwriter that sent this up to us. And it's either England or England, but I want to say England because it's spelled like England.
Yeah, I see it all the time. He's on Facebook and he's interactive and all that good stuff. But I just assume it's England, but it could be wrong.
So I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Randy. And here's the song title, Different Than I Remember.
All right, Different Than I Remember. Okay.
Different Than I Remember.
I'm just writing this down so I can remember it and won't remember it different than I remember. Interesting title. Okay, so Different Than I Remember. So, this is one that makes me want to think a little bit. I mean, the first thing is that comes to my mind, and I'm going to try and write this first goal is how could we write this as like a hit country song, right? Or some other genre, but like as a hit. I'm trying to put it in that world where it has the best chance, we think, right? So different than I remember. I mean, I think of the unanswered prayers kind of thing, you know, where like, you know, you run to the old flame and she's just different than you remember. And my hometown's different than I remember. It could be that. I mean, it could be, you know, you go back to your hometown, it's just smaller than you remember. And boy, the old Mazzio's is a parking lot now, or is a animal hospital, you know, it's a vet place now or whatever, a vape place. And my old girlfriend, she's a mom. And it's just different than I remember. And maybe you coming around to somehow like you're different than you remember too. You were different than you remember being who I told myself I was. I really wasn't.
Oh, that's good.
That like I'm different than I remember. Maybe now I'm different than I remember. Like I've changed over time, or I was different then than I remember. You see yourself through like, oh, I thought I was cool. I was a jerk. I thought I was the ladies' man. I was a SO jerk.
Or I thought I knew everything and I didn't know anything.
Yeah,
but look at me in this picture right here. Like, look at how cocky I look. Like sunglasses on, and you just look like you're trying to look like something, but now I really am something. It doesn't look anything like that.
Or maybe we're back in this hometown, and I want a second chance for this girl. I want a little something different than I remember. And it could be, you could change it to we, like it's different than we remember. We remember this town and we hated it or whatever. Let's make some good memories here. Let's do something different than we remember.
Yeah. Kind of like you had a bad taste in your mouth about the small town. Maybe you got out, went to the big city, and now all of a sudden you're starting to understand that this town, like it could be, the context could be how much you really like the small town life and miss the small town life because it's different than you remember, right?
Because back you're seeing it through different eyes, right? It was a set of shackles and fences back then, but now it's like protective. It's like, this is the place I want to raise my kid. There have been a bunch of songs about that. People moving away to the big city, now they want to go back home.
Yeah.
Than I remember. And you could do layers on that going physically, how has it changed? The Mazzio's is gone. Put in a better park kind of stuff. Oh, all the park playset stuff is plastic. It used to be like rusty metal. It's different than I remember, but also now like I'm rolling in, like I want to come back because I used to think of it in negative terms, like it's a nowhere, nothing to do town. But now I look at it like that's a little slice of heaven. It's different than I remember.
Yeah.
And not because of not because Mazzio's is gone, but because you value different things now.
Yeah.
So really, you're different than I remember. I guess I'm different than I remember.
Yeah.
Kind of come around to that. So that could be a cool like life song, and the Tim McGraw thing, Meanwhile Back at Mama's. Or Anthony Smith wrote this cool one called Metropolis that he cut, and then like Sammy Kershaw cut and stuff. But it's about the small town coming back to Metropolis. So I think that would be pretty cool. But I wonder, let's make it how can we put this love spin on it? So if it was like, I didn't like this small town, but now maybe that I'm back and I'm seeing you, meeting you here, it's a lot cooler. It's different than I remember because you're here. You know, it could be that kind of thing. Because it feels like you got to have some sort of going back to the past or something that.
I got it.
Yeah, Horseshack.
You could be like talking about like one of those high school parties, and you go there and you get in, and all of a sudden you're just like, man, you thought it was gonna be really fun, but you're just like really bored, or you're just like, I really don't belong here. And you had that debate inside your head, like, do I leave now? Is it too rude if I leave too early? Like, is anybody gonna see me? Like, you all that stuff goes through your head, and then all of a sudden she walks in. Right.
And she's like, oh, she's different than I remember.
I'm supposed to be here, right? Because this is high school. You're like, I'm supposed to be here. Like all of a sudden the vibe, your whole belief system on that party changed in a heartbeat.
Right.
Because it got reframed because now she's there.
You're like, little Susie grew up.
Then you can go back to now you've gone to the big city and you've come back and you run into her again, whatever, at the grocery store, at the Piggly Wiggly. And all of a sudden you're like, different than I remember.
Either that or just like she moved away and she came back and you're still in that hometown, but dang, she's different than I remember.
Yeah.
You know, little sister, don't you? That kind of thing.
Yeah. Little sister.
So that could be cool. I'm different than I remember. There's something interesting there, but I'm different than I remember. You know, kind of looking at yourself through a different lens of mature eyes or something like, man.
When you went to high school, did you ever go back to like your middle school or your elementary school because you had to do something there? And all of a sudden you're like, man, these lockers are freaking small. How do we ever deal with this?
How did I ever fit that kid in there?
Yeah, exactly.
No. I thought for a second, like, do I want to say, like, how did they ever fit me in there? No. How did I ever fit that kid in there? It's an artistic choice. Both fiction, but artistic.
But I mean, all of a sudden, everything looks smaller because
the hallways are like, wow,
right?
How are we making a hit out of this? I mean, Meanwhile Back at Mama's was that kind of thing. So I think that coming back to the small town because you want different things is cool. The girl thing, if you can put love in it.
is always a good thing. I mean, it could be learning to live again. It's still kind of a downer, that Garth thing, you know, after a breakup, getting back out there. And man, love is different than I remember. Or the dating game is different than I remember.
Oh, yeah.
That thing of learning to live again.
Because you got burned. Yeah, you got burned
and you're getting back out there for the first time in a long time. It's just, things are different. I got to swipe right? What? Or left? I don't. That wasn't a thing.
Oh, that's funny. That could be funny. Yeah, just a whole biopic like on the dating scene.
Yeah, which, I mean, could be super short shelf life. That's hard to say. Super short shelf life. If you're talking about swiping right or whatever, because then the tech changes and all of a sudden your song doesn't make sense. But that thought of like things are different. I wonder if there's some way where it's not, you've never been there before, but it's different than you remember. Like you thought of it so much. It's not how I thought it would be. But I remember thinking about this and dreaming about this. It's different than I remember.
Oh, that's interesting. That's a cool.
Like it's kind of like the music business, man. I dreamed about getting in the music business, and I dreamed about it. Dang, I'll be darned if it's different than I remember. That's kind of a head trip. You can confuse the listener with that. It's dangerous, but it's something interesting about it. Like it's not what I thought it'd be, but you're just saying it in a weird backwards way, which may not be good.
I like that different than I remember when you're thinking about something in particular, you know, like a goal or something, the way that you dreamt about it, you thought about it, you've gone through it a million ways. It could be a message of never sort of turns out the way you plan, but God's always got the plan, or the universe is always should be. You're kind of laughing at yourself saying, well, and it turned out to be different than I remember because I thought it was going to go this way, but it ended up going this way. Yeah. And I wasn't happy about it at the time, but now I got this and that. And
yeah, at the time it was a negative. Now it's a positive. I guess it's different than I remember.
Yeah.
I thought it was a bad thing. Turns out it's a good thing. I got you. Yeah.
But they both play in, right? Because even then, if the only reason you think it's a bad thing is because you had a different expectation. And the only reason you could create the expectation was you were thinking about it in advance and it wasn't what you thought it was going to be, right? And then, so it could be different than you remember going into it, and then different than you remember looking back at it too, right?
And what if things aren't different than you remember? We're just kind of assuming it is different than I remember. What if it isn't different than I remember? What if I wish it were different than I remember? Right? There are other things that we could put on the front of that phrase. We both just kind of assumed it is different than I remember, but it didn't have to be that, right? It's like, Susie and I get back together. It's like, dang, I was really hoping to be different than I remember.
I've had that so many times, dude.
Same thing. It's not. I hoped to be different than I remember. Or the small town, it didn't change, and you still feel shackles or whatever. Or I hope it's different than I remember. Going back to something, going back to your old home, going back to revisiting something like, oh, man, I hope it's different than I remember.
Yeah, maybe having to go back for like a funeral or some big life-changing event.
Yeah,
it's the first time you've been back since you left, kind of a thing, and you're like tripping. Mm-hmm. It could be a head trip like that. That's interesting, like in a good way,
Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's different than you remember because you're different than you remember, which is the whole thing too. So that's something different than I remember. I mean, kids these days, they can grow up in the same town, but they have a different life than I remember. Mm-hmm. Because it's a different experience growing up in Batesville, Arkansas now than it was back then. Maybe because either it's more diverse or we didn't have phones. We didn't have our head up our apps all day.
Head up our apps.
Yeah. Thank you. I saw that off a Tennessee road sign that tells you to be careful. Get your head out of your app. I love it. Whoever has that job, man, doing
they're so clever, right?
They're so clever. Like, how do I get that? That's a songwriter somewhere, right? It's like, to make ends meet, I write road signs. They're good. Let's see.
What about you make it about love and everything is different than you remember? Like all of a sudden the hamburger tastes better than it ever tasted. The taco is the most amazing taco you've ever had. Mm-hmm. The boring trip to whatever, the park or museum is now better than you remember because this person's with you and you're just talking about everything that you can find the most mundane things. Now all of a sudden they're super exciting.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was thinking about before, talking about coming back to this town, and it's different than I remember because you're here. Kind of what I was getting at, but didn't really flesh that out. So yeah, that's.
But you could do that like in the now, right? Like you're wherever you are right now, and this hamburger tastes differently than it did a week ago because I just met her, and the conversation's better, and the view is better, and the feeling is better, and the mood is better and more exciting. And
either that or like I thought I was in love before, but this is different than what I remember.
Yeah, there you go.
It's the next level love.
Yeah.
This is different than I remember. It's a new girl, it's a different girl, but it's like more of a true love thing. Like this is true love. That other wasn't. I thought it was, but like, oh, this is different than I remember.
Oh, there you
Like
go.
I've been in, thought I knew what love was, but this is different than I remember. Could be that kind of thing. It's still a little clunky. It feels, because you like, remember, this is different than what I thought it was. It still feels a little clunky that way. The most natural still feels like the town you go back to and you thought it sucked. And now it doesn't. And it's different than I remember because I'm different than I remember being at the time, which I think is cool.
If you could word that in a super cool,
Really concise,
nostalgic way about the old town, kind of the way that, was it Shane, who wrote American Kid?
Luke Laird, and I don't remember who else.
Growing up in little pink houses, making out on living room couches, smoking on a Saturday night, a little messed up, but we're all right. I don't know what it is about that lyric, but it brought me right back to that.
Yeah.
Making out on living room couches, little pink houses. That set the tone, right? Because that was 1984 or something with John Cougar Mellencamp. Well, then all the lyrics too, right? No AC.
No AC in the vents.
No MTV on the RCA. No AC in the van. No little yellow dog school bus kicking up red dust. Picking us up at a barbed wire fence. Like they're just, sort of
all these little images.
That picture of that small town. And then if you were clever with it like that, it could be super interesting.
Yeah, and it could be getting together and seeing the people, and some people are no different than I remember. Some people, some things are, some things, there's a lot.
Oh, you could go back and forth with him, sure.
Maybe,
like there's Bob at the same old bar stool where I left him last time.
No different than I remember.
Yeah.
But something's different than I remember. But this town is different than I remember. Maybe it's interesting, like this is no different than I remember. That's no different than I remember. But man, this whole town's different than I remember. Yeah. Because now it's like, it used to be, it was like the same old, boring, nothing ever changes. Now like, oh man, nothing ever changes.
Yeah. Yeah. All of a sudden it feels more comfortable.
And so that could be pretty like, it's no different than I remember. Now this town's.
So it's like a reframing song, right? So where you're painting one picture and you're like, oh, this, I hated it because of this. And then you paint the exact same picture, but it's reframed, right? And I love it for the same reason that I hated it before.
Exactly.
I get
same thing that took me away is the same thing that's bringing me back.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
What made me want to get out of town is what brings me back to it, is that it's no different than I remember. And so I guess I'm different than I remember.
Yeah.
So that could be cool. What if the girl, like, man, you're different than I remember. What if you like seeing her because you're a more mature guy, you're seeing her in a different way, you're seeing her value differently, or I wonder if you can make it a more personal thing too. It's like, that girl I hadn't seen you in a long time, you're different than I remember, but it's because you're still just as beautiful, blah, 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 but I see your value more now, kind of thing, because I'm different than I remember. Maybe it's an ex, kind of get back together kind of thing. You're different than I remember, but give me a chance because I'm different than I remember. Could be something too. So it could be kind of a love thing. I'm kind of like, I'm different than you remember.
Like another twist on Thank God for Unanswered Prayers, right? He meets the ex and realizes that it wasn't for him, but this time you meet the ex and you're both exes, and maybe you can have a go at it because you're both different than what you remember. Yeah,
or maybe she isn't, but because you are, it might work out now.
Oh, yeah.
Like I've changed.
Oh, that would be interesting. Yeah, like you're no different than I remember. Like you're the same person.
You're different than I remember because I'm different than I remember. Like you're still beautiful. You're still got that smile that knocks me out. And you're still kind, but you're different than I remember. Like I know how to handle that better. Or maybe she's still just as crazy. As she was.
Now you appreciate it.
But now that's what I'm looking for. Or something. So there might be something in there, because I'm always trying to think, how do you bring it back to relationship, love, positive? Because that's just country song chart breakdown a couple episodes ago. Positive, me, you, mid to up tempo.
That's what's up.
I mean, that's what's up in the moment, seeing her now. And you could play off both. This sounds different than I remember. And you're different than I remember. Maybe I should give both a chance again. Maybe it'll work out this time. Why? Because I'm different than I remember.
Yeah.
I changed. That could be your whole map right there. Is a small town looking more attractive now. The girl that didn't work out before, that just misfired back then. There's something there, and it might work out this time. Why? Because I'm different. Yeah. I've changed. I've grown up. I'm different than I remember.
There you go.
So that could be your whole thing right there, and that's pretty
cool. That just happened. You put it in the bridge too, right where it's supposed to be.
Right where it's supposed to be, and so you got all those images of small town that people can relate to, and then you got the love interest thing in there, which is super important. And talking to you, right? Like if you're like, girl, back here it's crazy. It's like nothing's changed, but everything's changed about this place. It's different than I remember. And it used to be so small and I used to hate it, but now it just feels like coming home. And girl, you look great. No, I mean, you haven't changed at all, but yet you're making everything around here feel different. And maybe we should try again. Why? Because I'm different than I remember. Not like I've grown up. I'm not the same kid that broke your heart or whatever. We broke each other's heart. So being all right now in the moment, speaking to that girl.
Yeah.
Positive love thing.
Yeah.
And then put some beat to it. Remember, cry when you write, dance when you produce.
I love that. Well, right on, guys. Well, that brings us, I think that's like a 5 or 6, maybe really good.
Something. There's some stuff in there, Randy.
There's a lot going on. Yeah. Thank you again, Randy Anglin. If you've got some ideas that you want to send in for song titles, Brent was talking last time, breathing in new life to song titles and concepts that were dead to him that 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Go digging through, send them in. We'll give them a rattle here. And you never know. We might re-inspire you to go to a new place. But send them to info@daredevilproduction.com. Production is singular. There is no S. info@daredevilproduction.com. And then also, what if Randy wants to work some more on this with you?
Yeah, that's a thing. People do it. So I'd be happy to meet with you, Randy, or anyone else that has a song that they want to have me look at and go, hey, I got this title. I'm not sure what to do with. Hey, can you song title challenge this? Let's dive in. Let me be Johnny, right? And I'll be me. And we'll bounce. And people do that. Other people say, hey, I've got this thing that's finished, but how is it? Let's put it under the microscope. Or they just have questions about the art, the craft of the business of songwriting. All that stuff I'm more than happy to help with and be at your service. You can get details. You can look at my calendar and you can actually book a session with me because I do consultation. And you can find all that at songwritingpro.com/coaching. That is songwritingpro.com/coaching. And we'll hook up. We'll meet up. It doesn't matter where in the world you are. We meet up over, Skype or Zoom or FaceTime or phone. And every once in a while, I open up in-person sessions in Nashville or other places I might be. We can meet up that way too. So it's all that songwritingpro.com/coaching.
There we go. All right, guys. Well, that brings us to the end of another episode. This song title. Listen to me. This podcast exists because we want you to win. So keep on climbing.
And we'll see you at the top.